What happens when a comedian known for razor-sharp wit walks into a studio built on strong opinions and refuses to smile his way through the pressure? The clip opens mid-sentence, the kind of moment producers usually cut away from. Joy Behar leans forward, her voice light but pointed, eyes fixed across the table. Bowen Yang doesn't laugh. He doesn't deflect. He looks back, calm, steady, and then he says it, the line that changes the temperature in the room. With respect, I think that framing is exactly the problem. The audience gasps softly, not loud enough to interrupt, but loud enough to be felt. Before we go any further, if you love being inside these explosive celebrity moments as they unfold, make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk right now, hit that like button, and drop a comment, because what you're about to hear only gets more intense from here. The camera pulls wide, revealing the familiar pastel set of the view, but nothing feels familiar anymore. What was supposed to be a relaxed daytime conversation has turned into something brittle and electric. Bowen Yang sits upright, hands loosely clasped, shoulders squared. Not defensive, not aggressive, just grounded. Joy Behar tilts her head slightly, that half smile she wears when she thinks she's pressing a point everyone else is afraid to say. Around them, the other hosts shift in their seats, sensing it too. This isn't banter. This isn't comedy. This is a collision. Just minutes earlier, the mood had been easy. Bowen had joked about late-night writers' rooms, about the absurdity of fame, about how comedy often feels like running on a treadmill that's always speeding up. The audience laughed, the panel laughed, even Joy nodded along. But then the conversation drifted. Politics, culture, responsibility. The invisible line every guest knows not to cross was suddenly right there, bold and unavoidable. Joy's voice cut through first. "But don't you think," she said, tapping her pen lightly against the table, "that comedians sometimes hide behind irony instead of owning the impact of what they say?" It sounded casual, reasonable even, but there was an edge under it, a suggestion that landed heavier than the words themselves. Bowen inhaled slowly. In his mind, 1,000 instincts fired at once, the instinct to joke, to soften, to redirect. Years in comedy had trained him to keep things moving, keep things light. But something in Joy's tone told him that wouldn't be enough today. He glanced briefly toward the audience, then back at Joy. "I don't think irony is hiding," he replied, measured. "I think it's a language. And like any language, it can be misunderstood or deliberately simplified." A murmur rippled through the crowd. One of the co-hosts raised her eyebrows. Joy's smile faded just a fraction. "But when people feel hurt," Joy pressed, "doesn't intention stop mattering?" This was the moment. The pivot. Bowen leaned in slightly now, voice still even, but firmer. "I don't agree with that," he said. "Because if intention doesn't matter, then context doesn't matter. And if context doesn't matter, then we're not having conversations, we're having verdicts." The word hung there. Verdicts. Heavy. Final. The studio lights felt brighter, harsher. Joy let out a short laugh, not amused, more surprised. "That sounds very convenient for the person speaking," she shot back. For the first time, Bowen's expression changed, not anger, not irritation, but resolve. "It's not convenience," he said. "It's accountability. And accountability goes both ways." You could feel the audience lean in, bodies shifting forward as one. Somewhere off camera, a producer probably tightened their grip on a headset, debating whether to steer the conversation back to safer ground. But it was too late. The moment had momentum now. Joy crossed her arms, her voice sharper. "So you're saying criticism is unfair?" "No," Bowen replied immediately. "I'm saying criticism is necessary. But it has to be honest. Not performative. Not weaponized." That did it. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. One co-host glanced at Joy, then at Bowen, clearly torn between stepping in and letting it play out. The applause sign flickered uncertainly, then stayed dark. This wasn't applause territory. This was watch closely territory. Inside Bowen's chest, his heart thudded louder than he expected. He knew exactly how this would look in headlines. He knew clips would be cut, words isolated, tone debated. But he also knew that backing down now would feel worse than any backlash later. Joy, for her part, felt that familiar spark she'd carried through decades of television. The refusal to let a challenge go unanswered. "So what?" she said, leaning forward again. "You're accusing people of bad faith just because they disagree with you?" Bowen met her gaze. "I'm saying that when disagreement turns into dismissal, we all lose something. Especially on a platform like this. Silence. Not awkward silence. Charged silence. The kind that makes time stretch. The audience waited. The panel waited. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Somewhere in that pause, the clash became more than a debate. It became a reflection of something larger: generations, expectations, the shifting rules of public conversation. And everyone in that studio knew it. This wasn't just Bowen Yang versus Joy Behar anymore. This was about who gets to define the terms of the discussion, and at what cost. As Joy opened her mouth to respond, the director finally cut to a commercial tease. Music swelled, graphics flashed, but the tension didn't fade. If anything, it hardened, settling into the walls of the studio, into the minds of everyone watching at home. And as the screen faded out, one thing was clear. When they came back, nothing would be the same. The red light blinked off as the show slipped into commercial, but the tension didn't follow the script. It stayed. It lingered in the air like static after a lightning strike. Bowen Yang sat back in his chair, shoulders still squared, jaw set, eyes focused somewhere past the cameras. Across from him, Joy Behar exhaled sharply, shaking her head just enough to signal disbelief without saying a word. The studio audience whispered among themselves, unsure whether they'd just witnessed a rare moment of honesty, or the beginning of a televised standoff no one could walk away from cleanly. Behind the scenes, producers hovered. One whispered into a headset, another gestured toward the panel, silently urging calm. But live television has a way of amplifying whatever emotions are already present, and this room was saturated with them. Bowen's thoughts drifted, if only for a moment. He remembered his first time watching The View years ago, the panel voices overlapping, the debates sharp but contained within an understood rhythm. He'd admired that rhythm. He'd respected it. Today, though, he felt like that rhythm had skipped a beat, and he was standing right in the gap. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to be honest. And sometimes honesty didn't arrive gently. Joy, meanwhile, replayed his words in her mind. Weaponized. It wasn't the kind of word guests usually aimed at her. She'd built a career on saying the thing others danced around, on pushing back when answers felt rehearsed. To her, Bowen's tone wasn't just firm, it felt accusatory. And Joy Behar had never been one to let that slide. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3. The lights flared back to full intensity, and suddenly they were on again. Smiles were expected. Normalcy was expected. But the smiles, if they came at all, were thin. Joy jumped in first, voice bright but tight. "All right, we're back," she said, glancing briefly at the camera before turning her attention straight to Bowen. "We were talking about responsibility in comedy, and I want to make sure I understand you." Bowen nodded once. "Of course," she continued, "because it sounds like you're saying comedians are being unfairly attacked for jokes that people choose to misinterpret." Bowen didn't rush his response. He knew the trap in moving too fast. "I'm saying," he replied carefully, "that comedy exists inside culture. And culture is messy. When we pretend it isn't, we end up simplifying people into villains and heroes instead of listening to each other." Joy's eyebrows lifted. "Listening goes both ways," she countered. "And sometimes listening means hearing that something hurt, even if you didn't mean it to." A few audience members nodded. Bowen noticed. He welcomed it. "Absolutely," he said. "But listening doesn't mean surrendering your voice. It means engaging honestly. And that's different from apologizing just to make the noise stop." There it was again. That calm firmness. Not raised, not aggressive, but unyielding. One of the co-hosts shifted in her chair, glancing between them like a referee unsure when to blow the whistle. Joy leaned back, arms uncrossing now, palms open. "So where's the line?" she asked. "Because from where I sit, a lot of people feel like that line keeps moving." Bowen let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "The line has always moved," he said quietly. "It moves because people change. Because we learn. The problem isn't that the line moves. The problem is when we pretend it's fixed, until it inconveniences us." The audience reacted instantly this time. A low ooh rippled through the seats. Joy's lips pressed together. She tilted her head, studying him. "You sound very sure of yourself." "I'm sure of my experience," Bowen replied. "And I'm open to hearing others. But I won't pretend my perspective doesn't matter just because it makes people uncomfortable." That word again. Uncomfortable. The studio felt it physically now. The conversation had peeled back the polished surface of a daytime talk show and exposed something raw beneath it. This wasn't about one joke or one comment. It was about power, who gets to speak, who gets to define harm, who gets to decide when a conversation is over. Joy's voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. "You know," she said, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen waves of outrage come and go. Sometimes I wonder if we're mistaking volume for truth. Bowen nodded slowly. And sometimes I wonder if we mistake longevity for infallibility. The room froze. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't cruel. But it landed with the weight of a challenge that couldn't be brushed off. A few audience members gasped. One co-host instinctively reached for her mug, buying herself a second to process what had just been said. Joy stared at Bowen, genuinely taken aback now. For a split second, the mask slipped, revealing something closer to surprise than anger. Then she laughed, a short, incredulous laugh. "Wow," she said. "That's bold." "Honest," Bowen replied. The director cut to a wide shot, as if physical distance might ease the tension. It didn't. Social media, unseen but ever-present, was already lighting up. Clips were being clipped. Opinions were being formed in real time. Joy straightened, regaining her composure. "So let me ask you this," she said. "Do you think shows like this, places where ideas clash, are part of the problem?" Bowen shook his head. "No, I think they're part of the solution. But only if we're willing to sit in the discomfort instead of rushing to declare a winner." Another pause. Another charged silence. For a moment, it seemed like Joy might smile, might pivot, might defuse. Instead, she leaned in again. "And what if the audience doesn't agree with you?" Bowen met her gaze without hesitation. "Then that's okay. Disagreement isn't failure. Refusal to engage is." The applause sign lit up, almost reflexively, and this time the audience responded. Some clapping, some hesitant, some enthusiastic. It wasn't unified. It was fractured. And that somehow felt fitting. As the segment edged closer to its end, one truth was undeniable. Whatever resolution people expected from this conversation, it wasn't coming neatly wrapped. The clash had exposed fault lines that ran deeper than a single episode. And as the cameras kept rolling, everyone sensed it. This wasn't over. Not on this stage. Not online. Not anywhere people cared enough to keep talking. When the applause faded, it didn't bring relief. It sharpened the moment. Bowen Yang could feel it in the way his pulse thudded against his neck, in the way the studio seemed to contract, as if the walls themselves were leaning closer to listen. Joy Behar adjusted in her seat, the practiced ease of a veteran broadcaster returning. But something had shifted. The exchange had crossed from spirited debate into personal terrain, and both of them knew it. Joy glanced toward the camera, then back to Bowen. "I don't think anyone here is refusing to engage," she said, her voice steady but edged with steel. "But engagement also means accepting criticism without taking it as an attack." Bowen nodded once, slowly. "And I don't take criticism as an attack," he replied. "I take being talked over, minimized, or boxed into a narrative as an attack. There's a difference." The words landed harder than anything before them. A co-host inhaled sharply, eyes widening. Another leaned forward, hands clasped, as if bracing for impact. The audience felt it too. This was no longer abstract. Bowen wasn't speaking in generalities now. He was speaking from experience. Joy's tone cooled. "So now you're saying that's happening here?" Bowen didn't answer immediately. The pause stretched, thick and deliberate. He looked at Joy, then briefly at the panel, then out toward the audience. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more deliberate. "I'm saying it happens everywhere," he said. "And when it happens on a platform this big, it matters." The room buzzed. Someone in the audience murmured, "Wow." The cameras cut between faces, Joy's tightening expression, Bowen's unwavering gaze. The co-hosts caught between them like witnesses to something they hadn't rehearsed for. Joy's patience thinned. "You know," she said, leaning forward, finger tapping lightly against the table, "I've been accused of a lot of things over the years. Silencing people isn't one of them." Bowen met her intensity without mirroring it. "Intent and impact aren't the same thing," he said. "And saying that's not what I meant doesn't erase how it lands." That was the spark. Joy's voice rose, not shouting, but unmistakably sharper. "So what do you want, Bowen?" "An apology every time someone disagrees with you." A ripple of tension ran through the audience. Bowen's jaw tightened. This was the question that framed everything as unreasonable, as fragile, as too much. He shook his head. "I want room," he said. "Room to exist without being reduced. Room to speak without being told I'm overreacting. Room to say, that framing doesn't work for me, without it becoming a referendum on my gratitude or my tone." The word tone hung heavy in the air. A few audience members clapped before catching themselves. One co-host opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly debating whether to intervene. Joy let out a breathy laugh, half disbelief, half frustration. "You're very passionate," she said. "I'll give you that." "This isn't passion," Bowen replied quietly. "It's exhaustion." That did it. The room reacted as one, gasps, murmurs, an audible shift. Exhaustion wasn't theoretical. It was lived. It carried weight. Joy's expression changed again, this time flickering with something harder to read. The humor drained from her face. "Exhaustion from what?" she asked. Bowen didn't flinch. "From having to prove that my perspective is valid before it's even heard," he said. "From being told I should be grateful just to be at the table, while also being asked to defend my existence once I sit down." Silence fell, deep, heavy, unmistakable. This was the most intense moment yet, the kind that stops producers from counting seconds and makes them start counting consequences. The cameras lingered. No one cut away. Joy stared at Bowen, her mouth slightly open, then closed it again. For the first time, she didn't respond immediately. The audience waited, barely breathing. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. "You think I don't understand that? I think you understand parts of it," Bowen said gently but firmly. "And I think there are parts you've never had to carry." That wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. And somehow that made it sharper. A co-host finally jumped in, trying to diffuse the pressure. "This is clearly a really emotional topic." But Joy lifted a hand, stopping her. Her eyes stayed on Bowen. "No," she said. "Let him finish." Another ripple through the crowd. Bowen hesitated, surprised by the opening. Then he took it. "I don't expect agreement," he said. "I expect curiosity. I expect people with power, media power, cultural power, to ask themselves who benefits from the way a conversation is framed. Because framing isn't neutral." Joy leaned back slowly, crossing her arms again, but this time without defiance. "And you think I haven't done that?" "I think everyone can do it more," Bowen replied. The director cut to a tighter shot. Sweat glistened faintly under the studio lights. This wasn't daytime television anymore. This was something else, raw, unscripted, unresolved. Joy nodded once, sharply. "You know what?" she said. "I don't agree with everything you're saying, but I hear that you're saying it because you care." Bowen's shoulders dropped just slightly, the first visible release of tension. "I do," he said. "That's why I'm here." The audience erupted, not thunderous applause, but sustained, emotional clapping. Some people stood. Others wiped at their eyes. The co-hosts exchanged glances that said, without words, we just witnessed something. But even as the clapping continued, the air remained charged. This wasn't a clean victory. There was no tidy bow to tie it up. The clash had cracked something open, and what came next, resolution or fallout, was still uncertain. As the segment moved toward its close, one truth settled in. This moment wouldn't stay confined to this studio. It was already spilling outward into phones and feeds, into arguments and think pieces yet to be written. And everyone felt it. The conversation wasn't ending. It was only changing forms. By the time the segment wrapped, the studio no longer felt like a television set. It felt like a reckoning that had happened to be televised. The applause eventually softened, then faded, leaving behind a charged quiet that lingered even as Joy thanked Bowen for joining them. The words sounded routine, but nothing about the moment was routine anymore. Bowen nodded politely, offering a small, restrained smile to the panel. It wasn't relief on his face, it was resolve. He knew what came next. The cameras would cut. The show would move on. But the conversation they'd ignited would not stay neatly contained within a single hour of daytime television. As the final shot widened, the audience reaction told its own story. Some people clapped with conviction, others hesitated, and a few sat silently processing. That split mirrored what was already happening outside the studio walls. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were racing across social media, stripped down to seconds, then slowed, captioned, reframed. Headlines began to form in real time, each choosing its own angle. Confrontation, courage, disrespect, truth. Backstage, the energy was unsettled. Crew members whispered. A producer exhaled, rubbing her temples. One thing was clear. This wasn't just another heated exchange that would be forgotten by tomorrow's news cycle. It had struck a nerve. Joy Behar sat still for a moment after the cameras stopped rolling, hands folded, expression unreadable. She wasn't angry, not exactly. She was contemplative. Decades in broadcasting had taught her when a moment mattered, when it would echo beyond the studio. This was one of those moments. Bowen hadn't yelled. He hadn't insulted her. But he had challenged something deeper. Assumptions about authority, about who carries the burden of explanation, about who is allowed to push back without being labeled difficult. Bowen, meanwhile, stepped off the set feeling the weight of what he'd said settle into his chest. He knew there would be backlash. He also knew there would be support. But more than anything, he knew he hadn't betrayed himself. He'd spoken from a place of honesty, even when it would have been easier to soften his words, to laugh them off, to let the moment pass. Within an hour, the media response exploded. Some commentators praised Bowen for articulating what many felt but struggled to say, calling his rebuttal measured, thoughtful, and long overdue. Others accused him of being disrespectful, of overstepping, of turning a conversation into a lecture. Think pieces appeared almost instantly, dissecting tone, intent, and generational divides. Clips of Joy's reactions were slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. Bowen's word choice, exhaustion, weaponized, framing, became hashtags, rallying cries, and points of contention. What made the fallout different was that there was no clean villain. No easy takeaway. Joy wasn't wrong to push. Bowen wasn't wrong to resist. That ambiguity unsettled people. Audiences are comfortable with clear sides. This moment refused to offer them. In the days that followed, The View referenced the exchange indirectly, careful with language, aware of the spotlight. Joy addressed it briefly, saying she believed in tough conversations and stood by her right to challenge guests, but acknowledged that listening mattered too. Bowen, in a later interview, didn't escalate. He didn't gloat. He said simply that he hoped people would sit with the discomfort instead of rushing to label it. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful aftermath of all. The clash didn't resolve neatly because real conversations rarely do. It exposed fault lines between generations, between styles of communication, between lived experience and institutional power. It reminded viewers that tension isn't always a failure. Sometimes it's evidence that something important is being examined. The audience reaction continued to ripple outward. Comment sections filled with personal stories. Some viewers said they felt seen for the first time on a mainstream platform. Others said they felt talked down to. The divide was real and unavoidable. But so was the engagement. People weren't scrolling past this moment. They were stopping, watching, arguing, reflecting, and in a media landscape often criticized for noise over nuance, that mattered. Because what happened between Bowen Yang and Joy Behar wasn't just a clash, it was a mirror. One that forced viewers to ask themselves where they stand when conversations get uncomfortable. Do we lean in, or do we shut down? Do we listen to respond, or listen to understand? Now it's your turn. Was Bowen right to push back the way he did? Did Joy ask the questions that needed to be asked? Or did the exchange cross a line? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear where you stand. And if you want more unfiltered cinematic breakdowns of the most explosive moments in celebrity culture, make sure you subscribe to Prime Talk right now. Like this video, share it with someone who loves real conversations, and stay tuned, because the next clash is always closer than you think.